We're running out of up-tempo Whitney Houston songs.
It's too slow, Paulie. It's too slow.
Come on, Whitney Houston Day. How can I not play I Will Always Love You, Steve?
I don't know.
Because this is how I feel about our show and you.
Yeah.
I Will Always Love You. She had so many hits.
She really did.
Great artist. Artist of the Day, Whitney Houston, because I Want to Dance with Somebody was number one this day, 1987.
All right, let's go to our guest line. And if you happen to be watching us on QSportsTalk.com, you see our next guest, just like you saw Jack Jokinen. We've got Andrew Chelney now, host of the Chel Squared NHL podcast, also a producer for Sirius XM. Andrew, great to have you on as always. How are you today?
I appreciate you guys having me back on. And a little birdie in my ear before we got back told me that you didn't start with hockey today. And I don't know if you know this, but the Stanley Cup was awarded last night. So I have a problem with that.
Yeah, so I wanted to start with hockey, but my co-host here did not watch a second of Game 6. Or did you watch? No, you didn't watch Game 5 either, did you? You didn't. Andrew, it's tough to talk about something.
Listen, we live in central New York, and I get the Tampa Bay Lightning are the...
it's the Crunch's parent club.
Yeah, but people were upset that the Bayheims were getting handed out favors by the Detroit Pistons, and that's what I led with.
I tell you what, Andrew, if you want to do the second hour with me, maybe we don't need Paulie. Maybe you and I could just do the second hour, and Paulie can go home.
Let's do it, baby. I'm here.
Maybe we can do that. So let's make up for lost. Yeah, Paulie's taking off his headphones. He's gonna leave. Let's make up for lost time. Let's talk about the Stanley Cup final. And I said this on Bridge Street this morning that I felt like the better team won. I mean, as much as those of us around here who follow the Crunch, wanted to see the Lightning win, the better team won. I mean, and I think the Avalanche, and you could speak to this, Andrew. The Avalanche was the favorite really from day one, all season long, and they're the ones hoisting the Stanley Cup. What was it about this team that made them so good and made them so unstoppable this year?
They're just a complete wagon. This is a team that was a wagon when the season started, and they only added pieces that made them even more dangerous at the trade deadline. They got Lehkonen, they got Josh Manson on the blue line, and they really, whatever weaknesses they had, they kind of solidified and fortified and made sure that no one was getting inside their own blue line no matter what. Darcy Kuemper, as their starting goaltender, didn't really have to do a whole lot over the course of these playoffs as the Avalanche just steamrolled anybody they saw. Even in Game 6, the Lightning were down 2-1 in the third period of the cup clinching game, and they had 4 shots on goal. The one goal that the Lightning scored was a goal that Darcy Kuemper should have had. There was a few of those throughout the course of that series, but the Avalanche were so good in front of him. It was a complete masterclass. It was one of those series where coaches will analyze every shift from that series for years to come because of how good and how solid the Avalanche team played in front of their goaltender.
We saw 6 games in this series. 4 of them were 1-goal games. And if you had told me that before the series started, I probably would have said advantage Lightning because they've got the better goalie, right? And yet Darcy Kuemper, he had that one real bad game, the 6-2 loss. But other than that, he wasn't as good as Andrei Vasilevsky, but he did enough for them to win the cup.
Yeah, Vasilevsky's obviously a better goaltender than Darcy Kuemper, but the Avalanche team overall played much better than the Lightning did, and that's kind of the story of the series, where Vasilevsky did everything he possibly could have to stop the Avalanche from scoring goals, but ultimately the Lightning just couldn't get shots on Darcy Kuemper. If the same amount of shots that Vasi saw were applied to Darcy Kuemper, the Lightning would have won this series pretty easily because Vasilevsky is so much better than Darcy Kuemper. But Kuemper did exactly what he needed to do, and the Avalanche won the series based on their relentless ability to not let the Lightning get quality chances in front of Darcy Kuemper.
So John Cooper was very upset after Game 4 with the game-winning goal. He thought it should have been disallowed for too many men on the ice. There were a couple other things throughout the series that I know Lightning fans were upset with from an officiating standpoint. What did you make of the officiating in the Stanley Cup Final? A legitimate gripe for the Lightning fans, or did you feel that it was a fair and balanced Stanley Cup Final from that perspective?
I mean, that goal, I think the Avs had 6 players on the ice. I think the Lightning had 7. So if you wanted to call too many men, I guess you have to call it teams that if you're going to do that, because officiating in every series and every game, there's going to be calls that are missed that could go either way. There's going to be 50-50 calls. There was a couple of calls in game 6 where I thought should have been called for both teams, and none of them were called. I think the idea of swallowing your whistle in the final, I'm not a huge fan of that idea. I think a penalty is a penalty no matter what. I think that gives way too much leeway to players just kind of trip and hack and do whatever they want to players instead of not being able to do that, even if it's the cup final. I think any game, any series should be called the same way no matter what time of year it is. But at the end of the day, both teams got called, both got shafted on some calls, and that's hockey. And I think both sides got good calls, and some got missed. Unfortunate.
Steven Stamkos after the game last night was adamant that that this season is over, but the run for this Lightning team is not over. Do you think they can keep this momentum going? Do you think they can stay a Stanley Cup contender again going into next season for a 4th year in a row?
I think it's a possibility. I think Vasilevsky is still one of the best goalies in the world, and he can lead a team to wherever the team wants to go. You still have Stamkos, you still have Kucherov. Braden Point didn't play in the series. He played, I think, games 3 and 4, but he was incredibly injured. He couldn't really do much of anything. And you add Braden Point back to the lineup, and you still have a core that is a definite cup contender, or at least in the mix to contend. In the very beginning, I had the Lightning out in the first series to Toronto because I figured, okay, this is finally going to be the series where Toronto gets out of the first round. They finally get something done. They're like the Maple Leafs were up 3-2 in that series. And then they blew it again in game 7. So with the Lightning, you never know. You can never count them out until they're out of it. I think this core is still intact. They're not getting any younger, especially guys like Ryan McDonagh on the back end, who has seen a lot of action, whether it be with the Rangers when they had their cup runs, now with the Lightning with 3 straight runs to the final. Ryan McDonagh has seen a lot of ice time, and he's not getting any younger. But I think you cannot count out the Lightning until they are out.
Whether or not they make a run next year, it's almost beside the point. I mean, Andrew, when you look at this stretch of what they've done in 3 years, 2 Stanley Cups, they get to the Stanley Cup final this year, and they just lose to a better team. How difficult is it? Can you put it in perspective for us? I mean, I feel like it might be a while before we see another team, another franchise go to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals.
Yeah, it's so hard to put into words just how difficult this is, because in a hard cap era where you cannot go $1 above the salary cap that is allotted to every team at the beginning of the season, it is nearly impossible to have continued success, because there are always players that have expiring contracts that want raises that you have to make room for. You have to shift players around. You have to make difficult decisions. And yet the Lightning have made the Cup final 3 seasons in a row. Nobody has won the Stanley Cup 3 times in a row since the Islanders did it four times in a row in the early 80s. And they didn't have a hard cap. There was no hard cap back then. So to do this 3 times in a row in an era, especially now, I guess post-pandemic, but we're still in a pandemic, where the cap didn't go up by much of anything. So in a flat cap era to do this, I don't think we're either ever going to see this, or we're probably not going to see this for a very long time. This is very impressive.
All right, Andrew, let's switch gears. Let's talk a little NBA before we get you out of here. What stood out to you from the draft last week?
I think one of the definite head scratchers were the Knicks trades. I think a lot of Knicks fans were kind of questioning the decision to trade number 11 for 3 first-round picks. For one, I think this is a smart move by the Knicks. A lot of Knicks fans might not agree, but they moved Kemba Walker's contract, a contract that never should have been signed to begin with. I guess the feel-good story of Kemba Walker coming back to New York was more powerful than Kemba Walker not being a great basketball player anymore. So they signed him to that contract, and now, as soon as they signed it, they basically regretted it. And we've seen that because they traded him for cap space. So in essence, they traded number 11. And again, like if they really liked somebody at number 11 and felt that that person could have been a huge part of their future, they would have kept number 11. They would have not traded the pick away. They would have built around this player and then moved forward. But they didn't do that. They moved that pick away. And they got 3 first-round picks. Now these are trade chips, because these picks are highly protected, and they're not these highly sought after picks individually, but together. And the Knicks now have their own picks that they can move if they so choose. So now the Knicks have a lot of pieces that they could potentially leverage into making a big time trade if they so chose. Of course, they probably are going to go after Jalen Brunson in the offseason, and that definitely was one of the trades that I did not see coming. But there's maybe Paolo Banchero going number 1, but a lot of people had Paolo going number 1 as opposed to a Chet Holmgren or a Jabari Smith. So that kind of was one of the biggest surprises to me.
As I'm sure you're well aware, right after the draft, Buddy Boeheim and Cole Swider both signed 2-way deals. Then Jimmy Boeheim caught on with the Pistons for a summer league roster spot. But in particular with Buddy and Cole, do you see either or both of these guys one day making their way and sticking on an NBA roster?
I mean, potentially, because especially Buddy's a really good shooter, and the NBA really needs good shooters. They always crave good shooters. You see people making entire careers out of just being good shooters. You see guys, JJ Redick was throughout his career just a dominant shooter from the perimeter. Dougie McBuckets, Doug McDermott, also one of those guys. Like there are players that carve out careers based on being lethal shooters. And if Buddy Boeheim or Cole Swider or one of those guys can do that, then sure, they can totally be something like that. I mean, O'Shea Brissett was a name that nobody really expected to thrive in the NBA, and yet here he is dominating in Indiana. He got a long-term extension recently. He deserves every penny of that deal because he's evolved into this player that can not only live in the NBA, but also thrive in it as well. So if Buddy and Swider can make something out of this and can show the NBA, like, hey, not only am I capable of handling my own, I can also make shots for you anytime you want, then they can do it, sure.
All right, Andrew. Great stuff as always. We appreciate you coming on. Good insight. Enjoy your week, and we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Andrew Chelney joining us from the Chell Squared NHL podcast, also a producer for Sirius